Hi, today I'm here to do a video for a new client. I think he's new, named Daniel. Daniel has requested um, a Tree of Life reading, which is kind of cool because I don't usually get to do those, even though I do offer them on my little blog thing. Um, Usually, most people do Celtic Cross and or Opening of the Key, and Daniel has asked for a Sephiroth reading. So cool. Um, Daniel, I tried doing this the other day, and of course, as I did a direct upload to YouTube and it didn't work. So this is why you're getting this late. Plus, if you haven't heard, we've been slammed with a really bad blizzard. So, so I've been busy actually doing lots of shoveling and stupid stuff. But anywho, so I kept the cards intact, and I'm just going to relay them and talk about them again. So, so today I'm going to use actually a new deck that I just bought, the Cicero's Golden Dawn Ritual Magic Tarot, which I like because it has a taut sort of vibe, kind of like a curlyish vibe, but um, without having the sort of dull coloration of that deck. As much as I love that deck, as you all know, I do like the coloration of this one a little bit more, even though the pictures are a little too cartoony for my taste. But anywho, it works very well. I like it. Okay, so I used as a significator the King of Pentacles for you, Daniel, because you told me that your birthday was in September, so you're a Virgo, and the King of Pentacles is traditionally associated with the sign of Virgo anyway. Excuse me. So even though I know some people would say, the king should really be used for older men, I don't know your age, first of all, so that's something in my defense. But also, I tend to base it more on astrology and gender, so this just happened to work. So anywho, at the level of Keter, uh, and also throughout this reading, I'm going to be referring to a lot of Kabbalistic stuff and terms. If you have any questions about them, I would suggest marking them down and sending me an email if you have any specific questions. I'll try to clarify some of the terms as I go because I'm not sure. Again, I don't know what your familiarity is with the Tree of Life or some of the Kabbalistic terminology. So I'll try to review each thing as I go along and connect it to the meaning of or rather connect the meaning of the card to that position. Okay, so at the level of Keter, we have the Princess of Swords. And Keter is the highest level of the Tree of Life. Um, I suppose I'll just turn this way. Keter is translated as the crown in Hebrew, and it is, in some ways, your highest good. That's how some people choose to interpret that position in a reading. I see it as certainly the most ambiguous of all of the Sephiroth, uh, as it is supposed to be. It is the origin and ultimate outcome at the same time. It sort of is the beginning and the end of the great circle, so to speak, that life moves in. If we think of life moving in circles, Keter, I think, in a reading, really signifies both the beginning and the ultimate end that is necessary to achieve. Um, it can also represent your connection, the place, or rather the connection that you currently have or not or don't have with your spiritual self, with your unmanifest self. And the Princess of Swords, as you might be able to see, she has a head with snakes on the top. She's associated with Medusa. Excuse me. I've also have terrible hat hair from shoveling. But anywho, she's associated a bit with Medusa. The Princess of Swords is very cautious, and she's very careful, and sometimes a little overcautious. She can be a little stressed out easily uh, by secrecy. She's wary of secret dealings, or she's very tactful, is sort of the word that I like to use with her, because she has a sort of diplomatic character to her. She's very cautious around people, and she weighs what she says to people very carefully. She's also very wary of people, and she's not entirely, excuse me, trusting of people that she doesn't know very well. So that is at your highest level, which is interesting. So we can either say that this is a representation of the overall life lesson that you are intended to learn through whatever situation you're going through at the moment, or it is the way that you respond to the spirit, which would be very wary and you're not quite sure of what to do with it. It could be either, it could be both. So that's at the level of Keter. At the level of Chokmah, which is the father, Yod, or Yah, which is the reflection of Keter, which the dyad, which basically means it is the will of the original monad. I mean, the idea is that Keter is not interpretable, and that it is only understood through the understanding of the word that it emits. And the word is representative of the will, and the will is not really understandable until it is given some sort of form in Bina, in the mother. So at the level of the father, we have the King of Swords, which is interesting because it's very similar to the Princess of Swords in some ways. It is a very aggressive male figure. Being in Chokmah, Chokmah tends to be associated psychologically also with your sort of archetype of fathers, your relationship to your father particularly, as Bina, the next card that I'm going to put down, is associated with your archetype of mothers and femininity in general. But also how you, sort of at the level of the soul, the interpretation and form that this is intended to take, which is often usually difficult and full of trial. But anywho, at the level of Chokmah, it sort of is just saying that the purpose of the Princess of Swords business, or the way that the Princess of Swords expresses herself most directly, is through the King of Swords. Now, either this is a representation perhaps of you, perhaps you are kind of an aggressive person, but I don't really think that that quite works. I see it more as possibly a relationship that you have with your father that isn't so hot. If it is your father or a man that has particular influence over your psyche, he is very, again, aggressive, very sometimes sharp-tongued, very driven, in a sometimes destructive kind of way. He can be mean sometimes, but he can also be very logical and rational. And the King of Swords is not always an evil energy or something. But the reason that I have a bad feeling about him is not only because part of you is wary of him, or you are learning wariness and caution through him, but the other reason I'm not too hot about him is because in Bina, in the level of the mother, the interpretation of those previous two cards, you have the Ten of Wands, the Lord of Oppression. So the big trial that you are going through in your life at the moment, or that you have been going through your entire life, is oppression and being dominated by other people, particularly this King of Swords person. That could be your father. If your father is very dominant, is very controlling of you, or if he was very oppressive of you in your past, that could be something that this is trying to speak to. So taken all together, the Princess of Swords as the root of things, the origin of things, again represents sort of just generally speaking a cautious personality and disposition that has come about or expressed itself through your interaction with some man who is, again, kind of aggressive and has attacked you in some way, either has attacked your level of self-esteem or your well-being, or has just been very aggressive in telling you what is right and what you should be doing, right and wrong and that sort of thing. So again, I get this paternal vibe from the King of Swords. Again, I could be wrong. And this sort of all solidifies in this overall idea of self-repression and sort of limiting yourself and feeling like others also limit you and restrict you. So that's your supernal triangle. From now on, we are in more the sphere of reality, I suppose, below the abyss, because that is the ideal world, and your connection with the ideal world is not so great. But we have to remember that the ideal world is trying to teach you something. The realm of spirit is always trying to teach us through archetype and story and the myth of our own personal lives. So the first manifestation of this narrative below the abyss is the Five of Swords in Chesed, which is the demiurge or the lord of the material universe. It is associated with mercy and benevolence. And the Lord of Defeat, which is the title of this card, does not really go well with that, which is another indicator that all this stuff up here that we just talked about in the supernal triangle is pretty negative and has a real darkness to it. You do not necessarily, either you don't really feel connected to a sense of benevolence or charity in your life, or you don't really have a strong connection of faith or spirituality. Again, I said before that you may or may not have a kind of wariness of the spirit or your connection to God, and part of your experiences with perhaps your father may have colored this or brought this about. Because the Five of Swords and Chesed, which is Jupiter, all about benevolence and mercy and forgiveness and kindness and generosity, those two things don't really mesh well. It seems you may feel even that you've been handed a very difficult set of cards in life, no pun intended. You may feel that the universe has sort of gypped you in a way that you have not experienced much benevolence or mercy because of the oppression that you have tried to struggle through. Now, in the level of Gabora, the next card is strength or might or aggression or basically that which has to be cut away, that which is not necessary, that is in the process of eroding. Excuse me. And that is the Three of Swords, which is interesting because, for one thing, that tells me that you probably have a fair amount of depression that you are struggling with, or just heaviness and sadness. Again, that comes from the burdens that have been placed upon you emotionally throughout your life by this individual or other individuals like him that have acted out in your life. And these have given you a lot of emotional burdens that have been very difficult. And the good thing is that I think, the universe is trying to weed those out, is trying to get rid of those or lessen them for you. But the problem is, Gabora being Gabora, it usually does so in a very difficult way. So in some way, you might also be attached to this feeling of sadness and might not necessarily want to get rid of it for some reason. Perhaps it's just something that you're very used to, and it could be because it's a strong part of who you think you are, what you have developed your ego to be. And so letting go of it, even though it would be a really good thing, would still might still be very difficult to do, is what that is saying. Now, at the level of Tiferet, which is basically your conscience, is sort of how I interpret it in readings. It is also your relationship with your holy guardian angel. If you know what that entity is like, or if you have any communique with that. It's also sort of what you know at your core truth. It's sort of your core true value. And in this level, we have the Nine of Cups, which is particularly interesting given all the swords that we have experienced at the top half of your reading. We've just gotten through the Three of Swords, the Five of Swords, the Ten of Wands, which really is quite bleak, the King of Swords, and the Princess of Swords. So out of 5 cards, you've had 4 swords two of them particularly sad, and one Wands card, which is sort of not one of the more positive Wands cards. And yet, your core value or your core truth is the Nine of Cups, which is the Lord of Happiness, or material happiness in this deck, the original Golden Dawn title. So in some ways, you know at your heart of hearts that you are happy, which is kind of contrary to uh, what we have experienced thus far. Somehow you seem to think that you have attained a great level of happiness, and you probably have. You know, there's that is of course a sephira of truth. You know, so I'm not saying that you haven't attained great happiness in some capacity. You clearly have, and at the center of your life is that happiness of some big dream coming true in some way. So I see that, you know, perhaps materially in your everyday life you have overcome a lot of these struggles that you may have mentally or emotionally, but it doesn't mean that they aren't still there. I think that's sort of what it's saying ultimately, is that all told, you still have a lot of baggage to deal with, even though you have managed to really create a successful path for yourself in life, which is wonderful to hear. Um, the next level is Netzach, and this I always assume, I mean, certain people, depending on how traditional you are with Kabbalah, see Netzach and Hod differently. You know, because of course Netzach is supposed to be the first real sense of the great multiplicity of life. You know, one of its magical titles is is I think it's Elohim Tsabaot or something like that. But either way, it has the word Tsabaot in it, which is hosts. We use it Dominus Deus Sabaoth in the Latin, right, for the Lord God of hosts. And Netzach means victory. So it's sort of God at the head of armies. So we get the idea of multiplicity and lots of servants of the divine in Netzach. Whereas Hod is splendor, yet at the same time Hod is Mercury, and it sort of has this binding principle, this overall rational principle that sort of binds all that together in some capacity. But the way I see Netzach and Hod below Tiferet is more succinctly your emotional center and your logical center, and how those two are working with each other or working against each other. And emotionally, and this goes back to their planetary associations, Netzach is associated with Venus, whereas Hod is associated with Mercury. Um, in Netzach, or with Venus, we have the Four of Pentacles, or discs, which is earthly power. And at the level of Hod, which is your intellect or your rationality, your logic, you have a card that belongs in Hod, actually. You have the Eight of Wands, the Lord of Swiftness. So to start with Netzach, your primary source of contentment, or your emotional, I suppose that's exactly it. You know, your source of emotional happiness, it's kind of redundant, I realize, but your source of happiness currently is financial security and material security. And again, this could be, excuse me, because you have had to defend yourself so much in your life that any time that you can secure financial security for yourself, or material security, or just overall well-being for yourself, that's when you feel happiest. And perhaps you feel that right now, currently. Again, you know, you have the Nine of Cups in Tiferet, which does seem to, again, speak to positive developments that you believe very strongly in, that you've worked for. And perhaps that some of that is here in the Four of Pentacles. Now, on the logical side of things, you have the Eight of Wands, which means, which always means a lot of effort expended very quickly. Sometimes not necessarily in a particularly focused way. It can be focused, but Hod to me tends to be a lot of dissipated energy expended very quickly in sort of a burst, and it's sort of brilliant, but it's not long lasting. And so in some ways it's kind of like rationally you know that despite whatever success you have managed to gain for yourself, it isn't quite enough to deal with the actual heart of whatever it is that's troubling you in the core of your being. That everything is sort of, everything that you do to overcome that is sort of just a small, it's a small step in the right direction, but you don't necessarily feel like you've traveled very far with that method. Does that make sense? Sort of like, um, as much as you might expect all this material success to sort of fix or alleviate whatever depression that you may be experiencing, it hasn't really. It's sort of just been a quick fix for that hurt that is still very much a part of you. Um, and in some ways that does mean that the Nine of Cups in Tiferet isn't entirely true. It is and it isn't. And Tiferet doesn't usually uh, work like this, but I think in your reading it sort of does, as the mediator between your higher self, your spiritual self, and your material self. You in the here and now, as the mediator between both. It seems a little delusional, frankly. It doesn't seem to quite fully acknowledge how to deal with all that all that baggage, or it doesn't quite recognize it in some way. There's something about this that I don't entirely trust, even though, again, I do think you have managed to attain happiness in a material sense. And the other reason I say this is because of your final two cards in Yesod and Malkut. And in Yesod, the level of the moon, or the ninth Sephiroth, the foundation of everything, and in some ways the subconscious, the firm base upon which all of this energy is sort of filtered and deposited into a being that is you, a unique entity that is you. You have the Six of Swords, which tells me that you probably have done some work with your subconscious. You've probably done some self-evaluation, and in some ways you have moved on from a lot of this pain and trauma, and you have had some progress in getting over some of the roadblocks that has put in your path. Um, you have it tells me that you have healed some of the damage, but certainly not all of it. It's almost like you haven't gotten to the source of it. And again, the source of it, I think, is just feeling like, I almost want to say that it's a feeling of being unloved, because of that Five of Swords in Chesed, in mercy or benevolence, that feeling of not, perhaps not feeling appreciated by someone. Um, just feeling very, again, defeated and not particularly, again, appreciated for the accomplishments that you've had. And I think we have to remember that the ultimate appreciation comes from within yourself and not from the validation of another person, even if it is someone like your father. Ultimately, you need to be doing what you're doing because it makes you happy, and not because you're trying to please someone else or gain their approval. And I think, maybe that's yet another way to look at Tiferet, the Nine of Cups, that maybe you do feel like you have found a calling in life. And that would explain your bottom card of the whole deck. At the bottom of the deck we had Strength, or Lust. I always call it Lust. The Ciceros in this deck have decided to call it Strength, the traditional title, but I prefer the Crowleyan title of Lust, and the number 11 for this card. But, long story short, Strength, of course, represents great passion and intensity and love for what you do, great zeal. And so that's clearly another side to this reading that I haven't really brought in. Um, but again, I think beneath that, we get the Two of Pentacles, which tells me that sort of fluctuates. That you probably are very passionate about what you do, and you have a great zeal for what you do, but that zeal fluctuates, and it might be because of some of these more mental and emotional issues that you are dealing with, that you have to struggle through, you know, and they sort of come and go, and that affects your drive and your love for the way you live your life. Now, we talked a little bit about Yesod. The last Sephirah in Malkut, your physical condition, you have the Nine of Pentacles, which tells me that you, again, have attained material success for yourself. In the here and now, you might be doing pretty well financially, and you feel um, pretty successful. Like you have, excuse me, attained some of the higher things in life, some of the finer things, rather, not necessarily higher. There's a difference. Some of the finer things in life, and you have attained some level of financial independence, uh, you know, and a level of beauty in some ways. You know, it could even mean that you might be known for your physical attractiveness in some ways. Uh, I t- in readings that I have ever done with the Nine of Pentacles tends to represent that. It's sort of, I always see it philosophically as the attractiveness of materiality, the beauty that can be, I mean, sort of superficial, but it's there nonetheless. You know. So that is in your material sphere. That and again that speaks to your financial situation, which again seems very good, and you're very happy about that. Uh, or it could represent your outer level of self-esteem, uh, which seems very strong. It's the inner stuff, you know. And if we look, I can't really show you it with this built-in camera. It's really frustrating. But if I can try to show you this reading from my perspective, um, if you look at the very top, we start with the Princess of Swords, and then, oh, I think this is reversed too for you, which doesn't really help. I think it's mirrored. But um, we start at the Princess of Swords and work this way, and then move that way to the Ten of Wands, and then go here to Chesed, Geburah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkut. But if you notice, if this is your outer personality and the personality that you most show to the world, that you know, the here and now you, this is sort of the intermediary you. This is your level of real, pure consciousness as incarnate in the flesh. And up top is, of course, your unincarnate spiritual potential. And so that's the most deep level within you, within your psyche, all the way at the top. And this is the outer, you know, sort of like to follow the idea that the psyche is like an onion. And if we sort of peel back the layers, they get progressively ickier beyond Tiferet, which I thought was kind of interesting. So a lot of this stuff, you know, might be repressed. Some of this you might not necessarily be dealing with. In some ways, that's a good thing, because by doing that, you have managed to overcome them somewhat. But I think what it's saying to you is that you still need to deal with them. Even though it may seem like you have overcome them on a surface level, they are still there, and they're still affecting you in a way that isn't necessarily positive or beneficial to you. And I think that I do think that a more spiritual connection with things, or a path of that sort, might be helpful for you, because I don't entirely sense that you are thinking in that way. And I know you've come for a tarot reading, so you must be in some capacity thinking about this in a spiritual way. But I don't see any major arcana in your reading other than strength at the bottom of the deck. So it doesn't even really count, you know. Other than that, you don't have any in the entire Tree of Life, in the entire reading that you have, which sort of concerns me, because the issue, I think, is a very important one. It's the issue that we all face, the baggage that we have psychologically, that makes us feel really poorly about ourselves. You know, it's sort of the job of all of us to wade through that muck and try to figure out what of it is real and what of it isn't real, or what of it is useful and what isn't. And I think you've tried rationally to just get beyond it, in order to function in your everyday life. Um, but yet again, it's still there, and it's not something that is doing you any good. You know, as far as numbers, I'm trying to see if there's a number that you have coming up more often than not. Um, I mean, I suppose the interesting thing might be the way we look at this as far as pillars are concerned. Um, on the pillar of mercy, we'll start here. The pillar of mercy, which is masculine uh, and more positive, as opposed to the pillar of severity, which is negative and feminine. We have again that King of Swords at the very top, which then sort of translates himself into again violence in a way, either literal physical violence or emotional violence, some kind of almost abuse in a way. And again, it doesn't have to be literal, in literal, particularly intense abuse, but it can be a sort of a more subtle kind of abuse that you may have received from this individual. And then below that, sort of where Chesed meets Geburah in Netzach, because of course the Netzach is more of a Geburah-ish Sephirah than it is a Chesedian, but it still is sort of associated with Chesed because it's in the same pillar. I mean, once we cross the line of Tiferet, things start getting a little strange because we start getting more mixing. And the final mix down comes in Yesod. But at the level of Netzach, if we interpret it as part of the pillar of mercy here, we see that need for security in order to be happy as a direct result of whatever violence you have suffered at the hands of the King of Swords. And again, this goes way back. I mean, this probably goes back to your early childhood, or even in some ways it could even be earlier than that. It could even be in a past life. It could be a karmic connection. It's sort of unsure. But I would assume that if it were karmic, it would have repeated itself at some point in your life. In which case, again, early childhood is probably what we're talking about here. On the pillar of severity, if we start with the sense of oppression and domination, being told what to do by so-and-so, resulting in this overall corrosive sadness that sort of eats away at you and makes your action not as steady as it could be. Your hand in action is not steady. It falters easily, or you seemingly sort of take, in some ways, you take an easy way out to deal with whatever this awful stuff is up top, instead of really addressing it, or addressing the cause of it. And in the middle pillar, which is technically the most interesting or the most balanced, you do have quite a lot of balance in your actual line of being. I think what you are not connecting with is the Princess of Swords personality. You haven't quite made that connection that you need to with her, and either that could be an expression of an aspect of your higher self. I probably would not say that she is your higher self, but she might be an aspect of your higher self, or a lesson about yourself that your higher self, sorry, too much use of the word self, or your holy guardian angel, your spirit guide, whatever you want to call it, is trying to get you to acknowledge through this overall life situation that you are going through. And I think, again, to summarize, remember, she is both the beginning and the inevitable conclusion of this. She's the egg that is waiting to hatch but never quite will, because she's always in a state of becoming, technically. So again, all of this is one big attempt on a psychological and metaphysical level to get you to embrace the Princess of Swords in some way, to adapt to her circumstances. And again, to summarize her, she represents caution and a sense of, I want to say, self-defense and self-protection. You have a few cards that represent a need for security and protection here, and that clearly has to come from somewhere. And I think what it's saying is that part of that is a natural part of who you are, of who you're intended to be, that you are intended to be a kind of cautious person, and that it's okay to defend yourself in a slightly aggressive way, um, but that you haven't quite wanted to make that leap for some reason, and I'm not quite sure why. It doesn't really say why that is. It just says that it is. That you need to connect more your reality, or what you conceptualize as your reality, with your past, your psychological past, and you have to try to work to integrate the two together. And that is, of course, the process of individuation itself, and it's very difficult and long. But there is help when asked for, is what I firmly believe, and that help comes in the form of the Spirit. I firmly believe that. So, I mean, my tip to you, as it is to anyone else, is to, if you read tarot yourself, or if you are practicing any sort of um, spiritual path, I would try try your hardest to ascertain the identity of your HGA, what it he or she is like. Um, if we believe Jung, it is probably, you being a male, it is probably feminine in some capacity. I know mine is, or at least presents herself predominantly as female, though I am sure that that is not necessarily a formulaic reality for everyone under the sun. So you might be different. Um, and I would try to ask that entity for help in your daily life, to sort of understand the situation and to deal with it better. Um, because again, it's not a bleak reading. It isn't. It isn't, because clearly you're not doing poorly uh, entirely because of it. Materially and on a basic level, you're doing just fine. But I think to live life to the fullest, as I know that you want to live, um, I think some of these issues that we've talked about with all those swords at the top, I think you could benefit from addressing them in a different way. Okay, I hope that this was helpful and it wasn't confusing, and that it was accurate and all those good things that you expect from a professional reading, and that it wasn't too convoluted with Kabbalistic stuff. I tried to keep it as simple as I could. Um, if you have any questions about terminology or certain cards, or if you need any more advice, particularly about the HGA or anything like that, I am more than happy to try to answer those for you. So thank you again for your reading request, and I hope to read for you again someday. Thank you very much, and take care and good luck with everything.